Imagine, just for a second, lining up 20,000 men, to charge across 2 miles of entirely open ground.
Right, just completely exposed.
Exactly. Straight into a weapon system that, tactically speaking, hasn't even been fully invented yet. I mean, you are sending men with single-shot, muzzle-loading muskets against entrenched defenders holding 16-shot repeating rifles.
It's a total collision of eras.
It really is. It's mid-19th century tactics just crashing into late 19th century technology. And, the result is the absolute destruction of a legendary fighting force, the Army of Tennessee, in a matter of, 5 hours.
Yeah, I mean, it really just defies almost every conventional expectation of military endurance. When we look at the Battle of Franklin, which took place in Tennessee on November 30th, 1864, we're not looking at a slow, grinding battle of attrition.
Right, it's not a siege.
No, not at all. We are looking at a violent, compressed collapse. It is this hyper-concentrated event where flawed psychology, unforgiving geography, and, like you said, a massive technological disparity all intersect at the exact worst moment for the attacking force.
It's just a nightmare scenario, and we are pulling our insights today from a really meticulous battlefield study by Michael Prichter. This is published at battlefieldtravels.com.
Yeah, it's a fantastic resource.
It really is. He breaks down this engagement with this incredible focus on the mechanics of the fight. So this deep dive is designed as a masterclass tailored specifically for expert history students, or really for any of you out there who want to understand the grim physical realities of how an army actually functions and, how it breaks.
Because it does break. Spectacularly.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. So our mission today is to trace exactly how the terrain, the weaponry, and the profoundly damaged mind of one commander orchestrated this disaster.
Yeah, and to understand the physical events of November 30, you really cannot start on the battlefield itself. The tactical decisions made at Franklin are entirely downstream of the physical and psychological state of the man giving the orders. That's Confederate Lieutenant General John Bell Hood.
Right, Hood.
Yeah, his personal condition essentially becomes the operational reality of the entire army.
Okay, let's unpack this because, his physical condition is genuinely staggering. When you read the historical medical context of what Hood's body had endured by late 1864, it's a miracle he is even alive.
Let alone commanding an army in the field.
Exactly. During the Battle of Gettysburg the previous year, specifically during the assault on Little Round Top, he takes artillery shrapnel to the left arm.
Right.
And it causes severe nerve damage, leaves the arm totally withered and useless. He has to carry it in a sling permanently.
And incredibly, that is only the beginning for him. Less than 3 months later, at the Battle of Chickamauga, he is struck in the upper right leg by a mini-ball.
Oof. Which is just brutal.
It is. And for those studying the era, it is crucial to understand that a mini-ball is not like a modern steel-jacketed bullet that might, pass cleanly through a limb.
Right, it doesn't just punch a neat little hole.
No, not at all. It is a heavy, conical piece of soft lead. So when it strikes human bone, it flattens out and completely shatters everything it hits.
So his femur is essentially pulverized.
Precisely. And the surgical response in the 1860s to a shattered femur that high up near the hip joint is an immediate high-risk amputation.
Right, there's no way to save it.
None. And the mortality rate for amputations that close to the torso was staggeringly high, due to shock, blood loss, infection, yet Hood survives.
Which is wild. And not only does he survive, but 6 months later, he is back in the saddle, literally.
Yeah, literally strapped in.
Yes. He has to be physically strapped to his horse every morning by his staff because he only has one good arm and one good leg.
When I read this, the only way I could conceptualize his command style at this point in the war is to think of, a boxer who has taken way too many heavy blows over a long career. Well, that's a really good way to look at it.
Yeah. The footwork is gone. The agility and the ability to bob and weave, the strategic finesse, that is completely gone. But he absolutely refuses to stop fighting.
Right. He only knows one direction.
Yeah.
Forward.
Exactly. So he relies entirely on raw, forward-moving aggression. He just throws massive, brutal haymakers because it is literally the only tool he physically and mentally has left.
And that aggressive posture wasn't just a physical adaptation either. It was the bedrock of his military identity. Hood had built his entire reputation early in the war under Robert E. Lee, executing these ferocious shock assault tactics.
The Texas Brigade, right?
Exactly. He believed fundamentally that the sheer willpower of a massive infantry charge could break any line. And this is exactly why the Confederate government in Richmond gave him command of the Army of Tennessee in July 1864.
They were tired of retreating.
Very tired. They were frustrated by his predecessor, Joseph E. Johnston, who'd spent months using these defensive delaying tactics to slow down William T. Sherman's advance on Atlanta. Rich men wanted someone who would stop retreating and just, throw a punch.
But throwing punches didn't save Atlanta. I mean, Sherman captures the city in September, and that completely upends the strategic board. Sherman decides to take his main force and march to the sea, leaving behind a smaller detachment under Major General George H. Thomas to defend the region.
Right.
So Hood knows he cannot chase Sherman. It's pointless. So he pivots. He decides to launch a bold invasion northward into Union-held Tennessee.
And the strategic logic here is actually quite sound.
Really?
You think so? I do, yeah. Hood's target is Major General John Schofield's Army of the Ohio, which is positioned further south near Pulaski, Tennessee. Schofield has about 30,000 men. Now, Thomas is further north in Nashville, assembling a larger force.
Right, getting ready.
Exactly. So if Schofield and Thomas merge their armies, the combined Union force will be mathematically insurmountable for Hood. Therefore, Hood's entire campaign objective is to isolate Schofield's army in the open and destroy it before that merger can happen.
He has to catch them on the road. And the crazy part is he almost does.
He really does.
This is the agonizing missed opportunity that sets the psychological stage for the disaster at Franklin. On November 29, just 24 hours before the battle, we have the engagement at Spring Hill. Hood executes a rapid flanking maneuver.
Classic move.
Right. He marches his army in a wide arc, gets north of Schofield, and attempts to seize the main road, the Columbia Turnpike, right at the town of Spring Hill. If he holds that road, Schofield is trapped. Game over.
He essentially places the Army of Tennessee directly across the Union route of retreat. Strategically, he has outmaneuvered his opponent perfectly. But the tactical execution on the ground is just an unmitigated failure of command and control.
Yeah, the sources describe it as a series of uneven piecemeal attacks. But what does that actually look like on the ground? I mean, how does an entire army fail to take a single road when they have the element of surprise?
It comes down to friction.
Friction.
Yeah, it's the concept that in war, simple things become incredibly difficult. The terrain at Spring Hill is confusing, daylight is fading fast, and Hood's orders to his subordinate corps commanders, particularly General Benjamin Cheatham, are either vague, delayed, or just poorly communicated.
So nobody really knows what they're supposed to be doing.
Exactly. You have massive blocks of infantry. And keep in mind, a corps is roughly 10 to 15,000 men arriving near the road, but they're not ordered into a concentrated, coordinated assault. One division might push forward, hit Union resistance, and halt, while the division right next to them never receives the order to support them.
Wow. So you just have these isolated pockets of fighting while the rest of the army is just sitting in the fields waiting for someone to tell them what to do.
Precisely. And because of this hesitation, Schofield's lead elements manage to hold a thin defensive perimeter around the road just as night falls. Hood's army just makes camp for the night, mere hundreds of yards from the turnpike, assuming they will finish the job and block the road completely in the morning.
And this leads to one of the most surreal events of the war. Throughout the night, Schofield realizes he is in a trap, so he just keeps his army moving.
Right past them.
Literally right past them. In the pitch black, an entire Union army, 30,000 infantrymen, thousands of cavalry, massive rumbling artillery batteries, and miles of clattering supply wagons literally sneaks past the Confederate army.
And sneaking an army of that size is a monumental logistical feat.
I can't even imagine.
They are moving on a single, narrow, macadamized road. They issue strict orders for silence. Officers are whispering commands. But, you cannot silence thousands of iron-rimmed wagon wheels on a hard road.
Right, there's no way. The Confederates had to have heard them. I mean, they were close enough to see the glow of each other's campfires.
They absolutely heard them. There are multiple accounts of Confederate pickets reporting the movement to their commanders.
Really? So they knew.
They knew. But the command structure was so paralyzed by exhaustion and confusion that no one took the initiative to order a night attack to stop the column. They simply lay in the fields and listened to their enemy escape.
Wow. So the sun comes up on November 30. Hood wakes up and the road is empty. Schofield is gone. And this is where psychology takes over and becomes the most lethal factor in the campaign. The text describes Hood as being wrathy as a rattlesnake.
He's just furious.
He is humiliated. But he doesn't blame the confusing orders or his own staff's failure to manage the battle.
What's fascinating here is how Hood internalizes the failure of Spring Hill. He sees it as a moral failure of his rank-and-file soldiers.
Which is just, wow.
Right. It's a critical psychological pivot. Hood convinces himself that the Army of Tennessee has lost its nerve. He believes that because they spent the summer fighting behind fortified trenches under his predecessor, they have become timid. He feels they are no longer willing to close with the enemy in open combat.
That is a staggering conclusion for a commander to reach. He essentially decides his army is cowardly, so he forces a forced march north to catch Schofield, not just to salvage the campaign, but to punish his own men.
Yes, to teach them a lesson.
He wants to force them into a massive, direct frontal assault, to discipline them, to purge them of their reliance on trenches.
And when a commander uses the lives of his men to prove an ideological point about aggression, rather than evaluating the tactical reality in front of him, he's engineering his own destruction. And because Hood is fueled by this blind, punitive rage, he completely ignores the actual geography of the battlefield they are rapidly approaching.
And the geography of Franklin is a nightmare for an attacking army. Let's look at how this town is laid out. Schofield has won the foot race, but he hasn't reached safety.
No, not yet.
The town of Franklin sits in a sharp bend, essentially on the south bank of the Harpeth River. Schofield's army marches into the town, and they hit a bottleneck.
The Harpeth River is a major obstacle. The few existing bridges, a wagon bridge and a railroad bridge, are either damaged or just totally inadequate for moving an entire army's artillery and supply trains quickly. Schofield's engineers have to scramble to repair them and lay down temporary floating pontoon bridges.
Wait, if I'm looking at this as a tactical problem, Schofield having his back against a river seems like a massive vulnerability. He is bottlenecked.
Very much so.
His retreat route is choked down to a couple of narrow crossings. If things go wrong, his army has nowhere to run. They will be pushed straight into the water. So why didn't Hood just do what he did at Spring Hill? Why not take his cavalry, cross the river a few miles up or downstream, and attack the bridges from the north, completely cutting Schofield off without a direct fight?
Well, in a calm, rational command environment, that is precisely the maneuver you would expect. Flank the obstacle, cut the line of retreat, and force the enemy to surrender or fight their way out on your terms.
Right, it seems obvious.
And several of Hood's subordinate generals, including Nathan Bedford Forrest, who commanded the cavalry, strongly advocated for exactly that kind of flanking movement. But remember Hood's psychological state?
Ah, right. The rage.
Exactly. He believes he doesn't have the time to maneuver if he delays. Schofield fixes the bridges and escapes to Nashville. But more importantly, he does not want to maneuver. He wants a direct disciplinary assault.
And Schofield isn't just standing on the riverbank looking at the water. He knows he is vulnerable, so he uses the delay to turn the town of Franklin into a fortress.
Yes. While the engineers work on the bridges in the rear, the Union infantry spends the morning and early afternoon frantically digging in on the southern edge of the town. Because the river bends around the town, Schofield is able to anchor both the left and right flanks of his defensive line directly on the riverbanks. It forms a tight, fortified semicircle.
A completely closed loop. There are no open flanks for Hood to attack. If Hood wants to hit Schofield, he has to go straight up the middle. And to do that, he has to cross the ground between his command post on Winstead Hill and the Union trenches.
Which is brutal ground.
The source material details this terrain, and it is chilling. It is 2 miles of distance, 2 full miles. And what does that ground look like?
It is essentially an unbroken, gently rolling bowl of agricultural farmland. There are virtually no ridges, no deep ravines, and no dense forests to hide an advancing army.
So no cover at all.
None. From the moment the Confederate infantry steps off Winstead Hill, they will be entirely exposed, visible to the Union defenders for the entire 2-mile march.
They are essentially walking into an amphitheater where the Union Army has all the good seats. But it isn't just the open distance that makes this a death trap. It is what the source text refers to as microterrain.
Oh, this is crucial.
I find this concept fascinating because it explains why maps can be so deceiving. If you look at a broad map, it just says fields. But the reality on the ground is very different.
Yes. Microterrain refers to the small, localized features, a slight depression, a dense patch of specific vegetation, a sunken road crump that are too minor to appear on a strategic map, but absolutely dictate the flow of combat for the foot soldier.
Right.
Because Hood gifted Schofield those extra hours by failing at Spring Hill, The Union troops had time to expertly manipulate this microterrain.
They didn't just dig a trench, they built a comprehensive defensive system. Let's explain what that looks like. They dig a deep ditch and they throw the dirt forward to create a thick wall called a parapet. Then they take large logs, place them on top of the dirt wall, and prop them up slightly with wooden blocks. This is a headlog. The soldiers can stand in the trench, completely protected by dirt and timber, and slide their rifles through the narrow gap under the log to shoot.
It's incredibly effective. And beyond the earthworks themselves, they alter the natural environment to create fatal obstacles.
Yeah.
The area around Franklin was dotted with groves of honey locust and Osage orange trees.
And these are not your average garden shrubs. If you have ever seen an Osage orange, the branches are covered in spikes that are 2 inches long and as hard as iron nails.
Exactly. The Union soldiers chopped these trees down, dragged the massive tangled branches out into the open fields about 50 to 100 yards in front of their trenches, and interlocked them. They point the sharpened, thorny ends toward the expected Confederate advance.
It's like a medieval defense.
It really is. This creates what military engineers call an abatis. It is the 19th century equivalent of concertina wire.
It is a giant, natural briar patch of iron-hard thorns.
And the purpose of an abatis is not to stop an army completely. It's designed to break their momentum. When a disciplined line of attacking infantry hits that tangled mass of thorns, they cannot march through it. They have to stop, break formation, and try to find narrow gaps to squeeze through.
Which funnels them into dense crowds right in front of the trenches.
Precisely. It bunches the attackers together in predefined killing zones, holding them stationary at point-blank range while the defenders pour fire into them.
And the most negligent part of this entire setup is that Hood orders his army to attack without conducting any reconnaissance. He doesn't send scouts out to probe the lines.
It is a complete dereliction of duty. By ignoring reconnaissance, Hood ensures that his men will not know the abatis is there until they physically run into it.
Which is horrifying.
Right. They have no time to plan where the gaps are or bring axes to clear the branches. They are discovering the traps in real time, under heavy fire.
Marching 2 miles across an open bowl into hidden, thorny funnels is horrific enough. But we have to factor in the collision of eras, because the weapons waiting for them in those trenches completely break the traditional math of 19th century warfare.
To understand the sheer scale of the slaughter, we first have to grasp the magnitude of the attack Hood is launching. This isn't a probing action. He is deploying his entire available force simultaneously.
Right. He lines up roughly 20,000 men to charge all at once. 20,000. To put that in perspective for anyone who studies the Civil War, the benchmark for a massive, doomed frontal assault is always Pickett's charge at Gettysburg.
Pickett's charge is the cultural touchstone, definitely. It is heavily romanticized and widely studied. But the assault at Franklin is significantly larger.
Right. Pickett's charge was somewhere between 12 and 15,000 men, attacking over roughly 1 mile of open ground. Hood is sending 20,000 men over 2 miles of open ground.
Double the distance.
It is a larger force, covering twice the distance, and the resulting casualties will be far worse. Yet outside of deep historical circles, Franklin barely registers in the public consciousness.
And the primary reason it was so much deadlier comes down to the staggering firepower mismatch. The Confederate infantry, those 20,000 men stepping off Winstead Hill, are armed almost universally with muzzle-loading rifle muskets.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because let's walk through the mechanics of that weapon, since it dictates the entire pace of battle for that era. To fire a muzzleloader, a soldier has to bite the end off a paper cartridge holding the gunpowder and the lead ball.
Right.
He pours the powder down the long barrel, drops the ball in, pulls a heavy iron ramrod out from under the barrel, rams the ball down to the bottom, replaces the ramrod, pulls the hammer back, places a small percussion cap on a metal nipple, and then finally he can aim and fire.
It's a process. A highly trained soldier, standing perfectly still on a practice range, might be able to execute that sequence 3 times in a minute.
But not in combat.
No, in the chaos of a massive assault, while walking over uneven ground and taking fire, the rate of fire is much, much slower.
It is essentially turn-based combat. You fire a massive volley, and then you have a window of 15 to 20 seconds where everyone is frantically reloading. For an attacking force, that 20-second window is your lifeline.
You have to sprint.
Yeah. You absorb a volley, you see the smoke, and then you sprint forward as fast as you can while the enemy's fumbling with their ramrods, trying to close the distance before they can shoot again.
And that is exactly how Hood learned to fight. You overwhelm the defender during their reload cycle, but the Union troops holding the critical center of the line at Franklin, right astride the Columbia Pike, are not carrying muzzle loaders.
They are holding the technological future. The text notes that regiments like the 65th Illinois and the 104th Ohio in the main defensive line are armed with Henry repeating rifles.
The Henry rifle is a game changer. It's a lever-action weapon with a tubular magazine running under the barrel that holds 15 metallic cartridges plus one in the chamber. That is 16 shots.
You don't have to stand up, you don't need a ramrod, you just pull the lever down and back up, and the gun ejects the empty casing and loads a fresh bullet in a fraction of a second.
The tactical implications are devastating. A single soldier with a Henry rifle can empty all 16 rounds in about 30 seconds.
Wow.
He can do this while crouched completely behind the dirt parapet, exposing only his eyes and the barrel of the gun.
It transforms the infantry line from a turn-based volley system into a continuous, unbroken conveyor belt of lead.
The window of vulnerability that 20-second reload cycle Hood relies on to cross the final distance simply ceases to exist. There is never a pause in the firing.
And it isn't just the 16-shot rifles in the center. The cavalry on the flanks are carrying 7-shot Spencer carbines. Some units have 5-shot Colt revolving rifles. The entire defensive perimeter is bristling with rapid-fire technology, and we haven't even mentioned the artillery.
Because Schofield has his back to the Harpeth River, he uses the geography to his advantage. The north bank of the river is elevated, so he positions his heavy siege artillery and field batteries across the water, pointing south over the town and the battlefield.
So as the Confederate lines march across those 2 open miles, they aren't just walking into a wall of repeating rifle fire to their front.
No, they're being subjected to enfilading artillery fire. And enfilade is a crucial concept. If you fire a cannon directly at the front of a wide line of men, the cannonball might hit 1 or 2 men and then bury itself in the dirt.
Right.
But if you position your cannons off to the side, so they're firing parallel down the long axis of the enemy line that is enfilade, a single solid shot or explosive shell can tear through 10, 20, or 30 men at once, like a bowling ball hitting pins.
It is an engineered killing zone. I mean, you have an exhausted attacking force moving blindly over massive open ground, about to hit hidden, thorny funnels, advancing into a literal, continuous sheet of lead from repeating rifles, all while heavy artillery across a river shreds them from the side. It sounds mathematically impossible for them to even reach the trenches.
By all rights, the assault should have dissolved before it ever got within musket range. And yet, at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, the long gray lines step off from Winstead Hill.
Wow.
The sun is getting low, the shadows are long, and 20,000 men begin the march. Despite every single disadvantage, they are immediately handed a massive, completely unexpected tactical gift by a colossal Union blunder.
This is where human error introduces total chaos into a perfectly engineered defense. Because the first thing the Confederates hit isn't the main trench line with the repeating rifles, they hit a speed bump.
Earlier in the day, Schofield had ordered an advanced position established to provide early warning and break up the alignment of any Confederate attack. Brigadier General George D. Wagner was ordered to hold 2 of his brigades out in front of the main works.
Out in the open?
Yeah, they're positioned on a slight rise astride the Columbia Pike, roughly 400 yards forward of the primary defensive line near the Carter House.
400 yards is a massive distance to be separated from your main force. You are completely isolated on an island out there. If you're a soldier in Wagner's brigades, you're sitting in a very shallow, hastily dug ditch, looking at 2 miles of open field.
Right, and Wagner's explicit orders were to observe the enemy, fire a volley to slow them down, and then orderly fall back to the main trenches before they were heavily engaged. They were a tripwire, nothing more.
But when you have 2 entire brigades out there, like 2,000 to 3,000 men, they don't act like a nimble tripwire. When the massive Confederate corps of Cheatham and Stuart begin their advance, it becomes immediately apparent to everyone that Wagner's line is going to be swallowed whole.
It's just simple math.
Yeah, the Confederate line is 2 miles wide. Wagner's line is maybe a few hundred yards wide. The Confederates are going to wrap completely around their flanks.
As the Confederates close the distance to within about 400 yards of Wagner's men, the entire 2-mile line halts. The officers dress the lines, making sure the ranks are perfectly straight. They fix bayonets. And then thousands of men unleash the rebel yell and break into a dead run, charging straight at those 2 isolated Union brigades.
The psychological terror of that moment for the men in Wagner's line must have been absolute. You are watching a tidal wave of 20,000 screaming men bearing down on you, and you know you cannot stop it. The discipline completely shatters.
It ceases to be a tactical withdrawal and instantly becomes a blind, panicked rout. Wagner's men break and sprint for their lives backward toward the main Union earthworks.
And this creates the most dangerous possible scenario for the main Union line waiting back at the Carter House. They have their Henry repeating rifles loaded. They are looking through the gaps under their headlogs, waiting to unleash this continuous sheet of lead. But suddenly, sprinting right toward them, filling their entire field of vision, are thousands of their own terrified comrades.
And they cannot pull the trigger.
Right.
If the main Union line opens fire, they will slaughter Wagner's fleeing men by the hundreds. The fields of fire are completely masked.
So the fleeing Union troops become an accidental human shield for the Confederate charge. The Confederates realize exactly what is happening. The veterans and Patrick Cleburne's division, right in the center, don't stop to shoot. They just put their heads down and run right on the heels of the panicked Union troops.
They mingle right in with them. And because they are running alongside the retreating Union soldiers, they completely bypass the fatal micro-terrain.
The above.
Exactly. The fleeing Union men know where the narrow gaps in the thorny abatis are. The Confederates just follow them right through the funnels, completely avoiding the tangled branches that were supposed to trap them.
They ride the wave of panic right across the final, most deadly stretch of open ground, totally immune to the repeating rifles. At 4:30 in the afternoon, the mob of retreating Union troops hits the main earthworks at the Carter House, scrambling frantically over the parapet. And Cleburne's Confederates pour right over the wall, right behind them.
The impossible happens. The defensive center is breached.
Hand-to-hand combat erupts right on the lawn of the Carter House. Men are clubbing each other with rifle butts, firing point blank. The Union troops who are manning that section of the wall are overwhelmed and pushed back. A massive, gaping hole opens in the exact center of Schofield's impenetrable semicircle.
And if the Confederates can hold that breach and push enough reinforcements through it to start rolling down the inside of the Union trenches, firing into the backs of the defenders, the entire Union army will unravel. They will be pinned against the river and destroyed.
It is the crisis point of the entire campaign, and it forces the Union command to instantly leverage a critical geographic advantage. The source text highlights the concept of interior lines. This is a fundamental principle of military geometry that expert history students really need to deeply understand.
It is. When an army forms a semicircle, like the Union forces at Franklin, the commander inside that circle operates on interior lines. This simply means that the distance from the center of the semicircle to any point on the perimeter is essentially the radius of the circle. It is a very short distance.
Right, so if General Jacob Cox, who is commanding the Union Center, needs to pull men from a quiet sector on the left flank and move them to the crisis at the Carter House, they just walk a few hundred yards straight across the Court of the Arc.
Conversely, the attacking Confederate Army operates on exterior lines. If Hood wants to shift troops from his far right flank to exploit the breach in the center, those troops have to march the entire circumference of the outside curve, navigating terrain and distance. It takes vastly more time. Interior lines grant a commander the superpower of rapid reinforcement.
And the reinforcement Cox relies on in this desperate moment is a reserve force known as Opdycke's Tigers. Colonel Emerson Opdycke commanded a brigade that had originally been part of Wagner's advanced division, but they had refused to stay out in the exposed position.
A smart move on their part.
Yeah. They had marched all the way back inside the main perimeter and were resting, making coffee, in a shallow depression a couple of hundred yards behind the Carter House.
So they're sitting in the exact right place at the exact right time.
When the breach occurs and the Confederates pour over the wall, Opdycke doesn't wait for a courier to arrive with formal orders. He sees the line collapse, he orders his men up, and they launch a ferocious, point-blank counterattack directly into the teeth of the Confederate breakthrough.
The collision near the Carter House is just a swirling melee of smoke, noise, and sheer brutality. You have thousands of men packed into a tiny geographical area, firing at ranges of 10 or 20 feet.
And buried inside this chaotic struggle is one of those incredible historical details that genuinely makes you pause. Leading one of the regiments in Opdycke's counterattack, the 24th Wisconsin, is a 19-year-old major. 19 years old, commanding a regiment in the center of the bloodiest breach of the war. His name is Arthur Macarthur.
And he was already a seasoned veteran, having won the Medal of Honor at Missionary Ridge the previous year.
Exactly. And during this desperate, close-quarters counterattack to seal the breach, MacArthur is critically wounded. He takes a Confederate pistol bullet to the chest and another bullet to the leg. He falls, bleeding out in the mud while the battle rages over him. But he survives. He recovers. And 16 years later, he has a son, whom he names Douglas MacArthur.
Wow.
The man who will fundamentally shape the 20th century, commanding Allied forces in the Pacific during World War II, only exists because a 19-year-old kid somehow survived taking 2 bullets at point-blank range at the Battle of Franklin.
It is a profound demonstration of how the macro-level sweep of history can hinge on the micro-level survival of one person in a trench. Operationally, the ferocity of Opdycke's Tigers, alongside other rallied Union units, achieves the necessary result. The sheer shock of the counterattack blunts the Confederate momentum. They push the Confederates back, step by bloody step, until the Union troops reclaim the parapet. The breach is plugged.
But securing the wall doesn't end the crisis. It actually creates an even more agonizing tactical nightmare, specifically for the Confederate soldiers in an area near a structure called the Cotton Gin, just east of the Columbia Pike.
When the Union troops reclaim the wall, they lock the door. But a massive number of Confederate soldiers from Stuart's and Cheatham's corps had already crossed the open ground and were right up against the earthworks. When the breach is sealed, these men are suddenly trapped on the outside of the wall.
And the geometry of the earthworks near the Cotton Gin makes this a uniquely terrifying trap. The Union trench line wasn't perfectly straight. There was an angle, a slight outward bend in the wall. So if you are a Confederate soldier huddled against the outside of this dirt mound, what are your options? I mean, instinct says if you can't go forward, you turn around and run back, right? 2 miles is a long way, but it's better than staying pressed against a wall where people are shooting at you.
Under normal circumstances, yes, you would retreat. But remember the heavy siege artillery Schofield positioned across the Harpeth River.
Right, the cannons.
Those guns are continuously firing over the heads of the Union troops, dropping explosive shells and solid shot into the open fields behind the Confederate front line. That 2 miles of farmland is now a continuous wall of exploding iron. To stand up and attempt to run back through that barrage is absolute suicide.
So they cannot go back, but they also cannot go forward. Because to crest the parapet now means looking down the barrels of thousands of Union soldiers who have reclaimed their positions and are waiting for anyone to show their head.
They are completely paralyzed. They are pressed face first into the exterior ditch of the earthworks. And because of that outward angle in the line, they are not just taking fire from the troops directly in front of them who are reaching over the headlogs and firing downward.
Right, the angle means the Union troops further down the line on either side can fire along the outside of the ditch.
It is enfilade fire, but this time with infantry weapons. The men holding those 16-shot Henry rifles are pouring a continuous stream of bullets straight down the length of the trench. The Confederates are being shot from the front and from both sides simultaneously, while artillery cuts off their rear.
The source text describes the horror of this specific location for hours. The bodies literally stack up in the ditch, multiple layers deep. The living are forced to pull the bodies of their dead comrades over themselves just to create a small shield from the crossfire. Eventually, after enduring this impossible geometry of death, the survivors trapped in that angle realize there is no rescue coming. There are no Confederate reserves. They simply begin waving white handkerchiefs or raising their hands. They surrender en masse because the math offers them no other choice.
It is a stark, gruesome validation of the defensive power of entrenched repeating rifles. And while this localized slaughter is happening at the Cotton Gin, the broader command structure of the Confederate Army is suffering a systemic collapse.
This is one of the most defining and shocking statistics of the Battle of Franklin. As the assault bogs down against the earthworks, the Confederate Army doesn't just lose foot soldiers, it completely loses its central nervous system. Within a very brief window of time, concentrated mostly around the Carter House and the Cotton Gin, an unbelievable number of Confederate generals are killed.
It is a decimation of leadership that cripples the Army's ability to function as a cohesive unit. In the 19th century, generals were expected to lead from the front, but the concentrated loss here indicates how desperate the situation had become.
Let's look at who falls in this tiny radius. Major General Patrick Cleburne, highly respected, killed leading the charge toward the center. Brigadier General Hiram Granbury, dead near the Cotton Gin. Brigadier General States Rights Gist, mortally wounded leading a charge. But the details of 2 specific deaths really illustrate why the command structure was bleeding out. Brigadier General Otho Strahl is killed while literally standing on the physical parapet of the Union trench.
On top of the wall.
Right. He is standing up there, fully exposed, taking loaded rifles from the men in the ditch below him, firing them into the Union lines, and handing them back to be reloaded.
And Brigadier General John Adams is killed when he tries to jump his horse over the enemy earthworks. His horse is shot out from under him, and he dies straddling the parapet, tangled in the Union abatis.
Why are generals' men, who are supposed to be managing the flow of brigades and divisions, physically standing on top of a dirt wall in the middle of a crossfire?
Because momentum is the only currency an attacking army has in this era. The assault had bogged down. The men were trapped in the ditch, unwilling to climb the wall into certain death. For a general like Strahl or Adams, the only way to get their men moving forward again is to demonstrate by personal, physical example that it can be done. They have to expose themselves to extreme danger, to shame, or inspire their men into moving.
But when they are killed doing this, the operational consequence is total paralysis.
Exactly. An army is a hierarchy of communication. If a regiment manages to fight its way into a small section of the trench, they need their brigade commander to immediately recognize that local success, rush reinforcements to that specific spot, and widen the gap. But with the brigade commanders dead on the parapet and the division commanders dead in the field, there is no one to coordinate the wider picture. The battle degrades from a massive army-level operation into a series of disconnected, localized brawls.
Hundreds of isolated struggles with no central direction. And where is the man who ordered all this? Where is General Hood?
Hood remains at his command post on Winstead Hill, 2 miles back. He is too far away, and it is getting too dark for him to clearly read the granular tactical reality unfolding at the earthworks. He cannot see that the attack has devolved into an unwinnable, static bloodbath.
So because he's blind to the reality, he just keeps throwing more men into the dark. He orders Major General William Bates' division to attack on the left flank, feeding thousands more men across the open ground long after any element of surprise or momentum is gone. They are just marching into the muzzle flashes.
As the sun fully sets, around 5:30 in the afternoon, the battlefield descends into a chaotic, terrifying night action. The structure of organized warfare completely breaks down.
It is entirely illuminated by the strobe light effect of thousands of muzzle flashes. Men are grappling in the trenches, swinging bayonets and clubbing each other with the heavy brass butts of their rifles because it is too dark to reload, or their weapons are too fouled with black powder to fire. It is pure, desperate attrition.
But despite the horror of the night fighting, General Schofield knows the fundamental truth of the situation. He has won. He achieved his operational goal the moment the breach was sealed at the Carter House. He did not need to destroy the Confederate Army. He only needed to hold them off long enough to secure his retreat.
And behind the lines, the Union engineers have done their jobs. The bridges are repaired. The massive wagon trains are safely across the Harpeth River and heading north. So what does this all mean? In an incredible display of discipline, Schofield orders a highly dangerous night withdrawal.
Disengaging from a desperate, close-quarters firefight is one of the most difficult maneuvers in warfare. Between 2 o'clock in the morning and 5 o'clock in the morning on December 1st, the Union infantry begins to pull out of the trenches. They leave a thin line of pickets behind to keep firing into the dark, convincing the Confederates that the main force is still there.
They muffle their canteens, they whisper commands, and unit by unit, they slip back through the town, cross the river, and march away to Nashville.
When the dawn breaks, the Confederate troops remaining in the ditches cautiously crest the parapet, only to find the earthworks completely empty. Hood has technically captured the ground, but the cost is beyond comprehension.
The numbers are staggering. The Union Army suffers roughly 2,326 casualties, killed, wounded, and missing. The Confederate Army of Tennessee suffers a catastrophic loss. Official estimates are around 6,252 casualties, though some analyses push that number closer to 7,000. Hood loses over a third of his entire assault force in 5 hours. He loses the core of his command structure.
The strategic consequence is absolute. The Army of Tennessee is functionally gutted. They have no offensive capacity left. Hood refuses to admit defeat, and he forces the battered remnants of his army to limp northward toward Nashville. But they are a ghost of an army. 2 weeks later, George Thomas unleashes a massive, coordinated attack at the Battle of Nashville, which shatters the Confederate lines and effectively erases the Army of Tennessee as a viable military threat. Franklin was the anvil, Nashville was simply the hammer falling.
When you look at the mechanics of this disaster, the lethal geometry of the river, the uncrossable 2 miles of open field, the hidden funnel traps of the Opdycke, and the crossfire angles of the earthworks, you realize that to truly understand this battle, you have to be able to physically read the ground. You cannot understand Franklin just by reading numbers in a book. You have to stand there and see the sightlines.
Which brings us to the most miraculous part of this story, how close we came to losing this physical history entirely. For decades, the battlefield of Franklin was a victim of its own location. As the town grew in the 20th century, the sacred blood-soaked ground where the center of the line collapsed was completely swallowed by suburban sprawl.
The text notes that by 1998, if you visited Franklin to understand this massive historical event, you wouldn't find a sprawling national park. You would find strip malls, housing subdivisions, and traffic lights. The most jarring detail is that a commercial Pizza Hut was built directly on the exact spot near the Carter House where Cleburne's men broke the line and some of the most desperate hand-to-hand fighting occurred.
It is a profound example of how easily historical memory can be paved over. If the physical landscape is erased, our ability to connect with the visceral reality of the past is severely diminished. You are left trying to comprehend an epic tragedy while standing in a fast food parking lot.
But then local historians, residents, and preservation groups decided that this was unacceptable. Organizations like the Battle of Franklin Trust saved the Franklin battlefield, and the American Battlefield Trust launched an aggressive, modern reclamation effort.
They didn't just place plaques on sidewalks. They engaged in an active, incredibly expensive campaign to physically peel back the 20th century. They raised millions of dollars to purchase commercial and residential properties at market value. And then they brought in bulldozers. They tore down the strip malls. They demolished the Pizza Hut. They ripped up the asphalt parking lots and hauled away the concrete.
They spent years reseeding the ground, returning nearly 200 acres of the core battlefield to its 1864 appearance. Today, you can go to Franklin, stand at the Carter House, which is still riddled with hundreds of original bullet holes, and look south. And instead of looking at a suburban subdivision, you see the open, rolling ground stretching toward Winstead Hill. You can visit the Carnton Plantation, which served as the largest Confederate field hospital, and walk the rows of the McGavick Cemetery, where almost 1,500 Confederate soldiers are buried.
This raises an important question, though, about how we interact with history. How much does physical space matter to our understanding of the past? Because this reclamation allows modern military officers, historians, and the public to conduct what is known as a staff ride. You can walk the ground step by step. You can stand where the abatis was placed and feel the claustrophobia being funneled toward the trenches. You can stand in the angle of the cotton gin and look at the geometry of the enfilade fire, realizing instantly why escape was impossible. Walking the microterrain transforms abstract statistics into a legible, terrifying reality.
It really grounds the history. So let's tie all these threads together. We started with General John Bell Hood, a man whose body was broken by the war, driven into a punitive, blind rage by the humiliation of letting Schofield escape at Spring Hill. We traced how that psychological state led him to order 20,000 men to march 2 miles across entirely exposed ground. We examined how outdated momentum-based tactics marched directly into the continuous mechanical slaughter of modern repeating rifles and enfilading artillery. And we ended with the incredible modern effort to rip up the pavement and ensure that this lesson in geography and hubris is never lost.
It's quite a journey.
For you listening to this, the Battle of Franklin is a masterclass in consequence. It shows us exactly what happens when leadership allows emotion and pride to overrule hard data and terrain assessment. It is a brutal demonstration of how quickly a technological leap like the 16-shot Henry rifle can ruthlessly punish an adversary clinging to outdated strategies.
And as we conclude our deep dive, there is one final, complex thought to consider. We spent time discussing Brigadier General Wagner's advanced men 9, the 2 brigades placed 400 yards out, who panicked, routed, and accidentally acted as a human shield, masking the Union repeating rifles. Because of that panic, the Confederates bypassed the abatis, breached the wall, and the battle raged for hours at close quarters. But imagine if Wagner's men had not panicked, or imagine if they hadn't been placed out there at all.
Oh, wow.
The massive Confederate wave would have hit the fully unmasked, perfectly prepared killing zone of the main trench line all at once. The Henry rifles would have opened up continuously on a cohesive, exposed formation. Would Hood's assault have been repulsed instantly at the parapet? Would the battle have been over in minutes instead of hours, resulting in far fewer casualties overall? It is a haunting paradox to ponder. Did a massive Union blunder ironically save the Confederate assault from instant annihilation, thereby prolonging the bloodiest and most agonizing hours the Army of Tennessee would ever endure?
It is an incredible thought that a mistake that saves lives for 5 minutes ends up ensuring a much larger slaughter for the next 5 hours. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the mechanics and the tragedy of the Battle of Franklin.
It has been a privilege to explore this complex history with you. Take care.